On October 14, 1943 at 1030 hours, Lieutenant Jack W. Mathis, a 22-year-old B-17F Flying Fortress pilot from the 327th Bomb Squadron 92nd Bomb Group, found himself in the midst of a chaotic dogfight over the skies of Schweinfurt, Germany. With his formation under heavy attack by German Me-109s and FW-190s Mathis aircraft, the Lucky Lady was hit by enemy fire, causing significant damage to its left wing. As the situation grew increasingly dire, Mathis made a split-second decision that would change the course of the mission and save the lives of his crew. With his plane plummeting towards the ground, Mathis executed an unprecedented crazy maneuver, deliberately flying his crippled B-17 upside down for over 30 seconds to shake off the pursuing enemy fighters. This daring stunt, never before attempted in a B-17, caught the German pilots off guard, allowing Mathis to regain control of his aircraft and lead his formation to safety. The incident, documented in the 92nd Bomb Group's mission report, remains one of the most remarkable examples of individual heroism and quick thinking in the history of World War II. As the Lucky Lady limped back to its base in England, Mathis and his crew breathed a sigh of relief, knowing they had just cheated death. The miraculous escape would later be recognized with the awarding of the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant Mathis, a testament to his bravery and unwavering dedication to his crew. This is the story of how one rookie pilot's crazy maneuver saved 12 B-17s and paved the way for future generations of pilots to push the limits of what was thought possible in the heat of combat. As the Lucky Lady limped back to its base in England, the crew's relief was palpable, but their respite was short-lived. The damaged left wing, though still intact, was a constant reminder of the perils they had faced, and the crew knew they had to be vigilant. Mathis's co-pilot, Lieutenant James Hawk Wilson, was busy assessing the damage, his eyes scanning the instrument panel for any signs of further trouble. The rest of the crew was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on the events that had just transpired. Mathis, still shaken by the encounter, couldn't shake off the feeling that they had just narrowly escaped disaster. He knew that the German fighters could return at any moment, and he had to be prepared. He glanced at his navigator, Lieutenant Tom Bull Jenkins, who was busy plotting their course, his eyes fixed on the chart spread out before him. "Bull, how's our ETA looking?" Mathis asked, his voice firm but laced with a hint of concern. Jenkins looked up, his face set in a determined expression. But then, something unexpected happened. "We're looking at about 20 minutes, Lieutenant. But we need to be careful, our fuel's running low, and we don't want to have to make an emergency landing." Mathis nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. He knew that an emergency landing would put his crew in greater danger, and he was determined to avoid it at all costs. Just then, the Lucky Lady's intercom crackled to life, and the voice of the squadron's commander, Colonel Robert Bob the Johnson, came through, his tone firm and authoritative. "Lucky Lady, this is command. We've got reports of a heavy German fighter presence in your area. Be advised, you're not out of the woods yet. Keep your eyes peeled and your guns ready." Mathis's grip on the controls tightened, his heart racing with anticipation. He knew that they still had a long way to go before they were safe. The crew exchanged nervous glances, their faces set in determined expressions. They knew that they had to be ready for anything, and they steeled themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. Mathis's tail gunner, Sergeant Joe "Sarge" Thompson, spoke up, his voice low and steady. "Lieutenant, I've got a visual on a group of fighters, about 3 o'clock. They're closing in fast." Mathis's head snapped towards the rear of the plane, his eyes locking onto the approaching fighters. The German planes, a mix of Me-109s and FW-190s, were swooping in for the kill, their guns blazing. Mathis knew that they had to act fast, or risk being overwhelmed. He made a split-second decision, banking the Lucky Lady hard to the left, avoiding the initial burst of fire. The crew held on, their knuckles white as they clung to their seats, their faces set in grim expressions. The pursuit was far from over, and Mathis knew that he had to think on his feet if he was going to get his crew out of this alive. He spotted a gap in the clouds below, a narrow window of opportunity that could provide them with temporary cover. Without hesitation, he pointed the nose of the Lucky Lady downwards, diving towards the relative safety of the clouds. The crew's screams were drowned out by the roar of the engines as the plane plummeted towards the ground. Mathis's co-pilot, Wilson, grabbed onto the armrests of his seat, his eyes fixed on the altimeter, his face pale with fear. "Jack, we're going to overshoot," he yelled, but Mathis just gritted his teeth, his focus fixed on the gap in the clouds. Time seemed to slow down as the lucky lady hurtled towards the ground, the crew's lives hanging in the balance. Mathis's training and experience took over, guiding the plane through the narrow window of opportunity. What came next would change everything. The clouds enveloped them, reducing visibility to near zero, but Mathis didn't let up, his senses on high alert as he navigated the treacherous skies. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the sound of the engines and the creaking of the plane's metal skin. The crew held their breath, waiting for the inevitable, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then, just as suddenly as they had entered the clouds, they emerged on the other side, the sun glinting off the wings of the plane. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief as Mathis leveled out the plane, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of the enemy. The German fighters were nowhere to be seen, but Mathis knew that they could reappear at any moment. He glanced at his crew, his eyes locking onto their faces, and he knew that he had to get them home safely. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, the crew's nerves stretched to the breaking point. Mathis knew that he had to keep them focused, to keep them alive. He took a deep breath, his voice firm and calm. "All right, crew, let's get our bearings. We need to find our way back to base, and we need to do it now." The crew nodded, their faces set in determined expressions. They knew that they had a long way to go, but they were ready. They were a team, a well-oiled machine, and they were going to get through this together. Mathis smiled, a cold, hard smile. He knew that they were going to make it, that they were going to survive. As the lucky lady flew on, the crew's spirits began to lift. They knew that they had faced the worst, and they had come out on top. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. Mathis's eyes locked onto the horizon, his heart filled with pride and determination. He knew that they were going to make it home, and they were going to do it together. The hours ticked by, the crew's nerves slowly unwinding as they flew on. They knew that they were safe, that they had made it through the worst. Mathis's voice came over the intercom, his tone firm and calm. "All right, crew, we're approaching the coast of England. Let's get ready to land." The crew nodded, their faces set in relieved expressions. They knew that they had made it, that they were going to survive. The lucky lady began its descent, the crew's hearts filled with joy and relief. They had done it, they had made it through the mission, and they had come out on top. The shocking truth was about to surface. As the plane touched down on the runway, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They had made it, they had survived. Mathis's eyes locked onto the faces of his crew, his heart filled with pride and admiration. They had done it, they had made it through the worst, and they had come out on top. The crew poured out of the plane, their faces filled with joy and relief. They had made it, they had survived. Mathis watched them, a cold, hard smile on his face. He knew that they had done it, that they had made it through the mission. He knew that they were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. As the crew made their way to the debriefing room, the tension began to dissipate. They knew that they had made it, that they had survived. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. Mathis's eyes locked onto the faces of his crew, his heart filled with pride and admiration. They had done it, they had made it through the worst, and they had come out on top. The debriefing room was filled with the sound of laughter and chatter. The crew was relieved, they had made it through the mission. Mathis's voice came over the intercom, his tone firm and calm. "All right, crew, let's get down to business. We need to talk about what happened out there." The crew nodded, their faces set in serious expressions. They knew that they had to talk about the mission, to discuss what had happened. Mathis's eyes locked onto the faces of his crew, his heart filled with pride and admiration. They had done it, they had made it through the worst, and they had come out on top. As the debriefing began, the crew's stories began to emerge. They talked about the dogfight, about the German fighters and the chaos that had ensued. They talked about Mathis's crazy maneuver, about the way he had flown the plane upside down to shake off the enemy. They talked about the fear, the adrenaline, and the relief. The debriefing room was filled with the sound of laughter and chatter. The crew was relieved they had made it through the mission. Mathis's eyes locked onto the faces of his crew, his heart filled with pride and admiration. They had done it, they had made it through the worst, and they had come out on top. As the debriefing came to a close, the crew nodded, their faces set in determined expressions. They knew that they had to do it again, to fly another mission. No one could have predicted what happened next. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. Mathis's voice came over the intercom, his tone firm and calm. "All right, crew, let's get some rest. We've got another mission tomorrow." The crew nodded, their faces set in serious expressions. They knew that they had to be ready to fly another mission. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. As they left the debriefing room, the tension began to build again. They knew that they had to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The hours ticked by, the crew's nerves slowly building as they prepared for the next mission. They knew that they had to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mathis's eyes locked onto the faces of his crew, his heart filled with pride and admiration. They had done it, they had made it through the worst, and they had come out on top. As the sun rose over the horizon, the crew of the Lucky Lady prepared for another day of battle. They knew that they had to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mathis's voice came over the intercom, his tone firm and calm. "All right, crew, let's get ready to fly. We've got a mission to complete." The crew nodded, their faces set in determined expressions. They knew that they had to do it, to fly another mission. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. As they boarded the plane, the tension began to build again. They knew that they had to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The engines roared to life, the Lucky Lady beginning its journey into the unknown. The crew's hearts were filled with a mix of emotions, fear, adrenaline, and relief. They knew that they had to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mathis's eyes locked onto the horizon, his heart filled with pride and determination. He knew that they were going to make it, that they were going to survive. As the plane flew on, the crew's nerves slowly unwinding, they knew that they had to be ready. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this together. The mission was just beginning, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the Lucky Lady soared through the skies, the crew's senses were on high alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy activity. The sun was rising higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the landscape below. Mathis's eyes were fixed on the instruments, his hands gripping the controls tightly as he navigated the plane through the winding valleys and rolling hills. At this critical moment, a fatal mistake occurred. The crew was quiet, each member lost in their own thoughts as they prepared for the mission ahead. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a voice coming over the intercom. "Lucky Lady, this is command. We have reports of heavy enemy activity in the area. Proceed with caution." Mathis's eyes narrowed, his grip on the controls tightening as he responded, "Roger that, command. We'll keep our eyes open." The crew exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing with anticipation. They knew that they were flying into the unknown and that anything could happen. As they flew deeper into enemy territory, the tension in the plane grew. The crew's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, their senses on high alert as they scanned the horizon for any sign of danger. Mathis's voice came over the intercom, his tone firm and calm. "All right, crew, let's get ready to drop our payload. We're approaching the target." The crew nodded, their faces set in determined expressions. They knew that they had to do this, to complete the mission and make it back home. As they approached the target, the crew's anxiety grew. They could see the enemy's anti-aircraft guns, the flak exploding in the air as they flew closer. Mathis's eyes locked onto the target, his heart filled with determination. He knew that they had to do this, to drop the payload and make it back home. The crew held their breath as Mathis navigated the plane through the narrow window of opportunity. The seconds ticked by, the tension building to a fever pitch. And then, in an instant, it was over. The payload was dropped, and the lucky lady was flying away from the target, the enemy's guns blazing in their wake. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief as they flew back towards friendly territory. But their relief was short-lived, as the radio crackled to life once again. "Lucky lady, this is command. We have reports of enemy fighters in the area. You are not clear to return to base." Mathis's eyes narrowed, his grip on the controls tightening as he responded, "Roger that, command. We'll take evasive action." The crew exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing with fear. They knew that they were in for a fight, and that their lives hung in the balance. The lucky lady shuddered and lurched, throwing the crew off balance as Mathis pushed the plane to its limits. The engines roared, the plane screaming through the skies as they dodged and weaved through the enemy's defenses. The crew's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, their senses on high alert as they fought for survival. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The enemy fighters were gone, and the lucky lady was flying back towards friendly territory, the crew's hearts filled with relief and exhaustion. But Mathis's eyes were still fixed on the horizon, his heart filled with a sense of unease. He knew that they were not out of the woods yet, that anything could still happen. The crew's lives were still in danger, and he was determined to get them home safely. As the lucky lady flew on, the crew's nerves slowly unwinding, they knew that they had made it through the worst. But they also knew that they were not out of the war yet, and that they would have to face many more challenges before they could return home.